Dados and grooves are important parts of many woodworking projects, especially cabinets and shelves. But many new woodworkers, I think, struggle with them for one of two primary reasons. Either they don't have a dado set for their table saw, or they have one but it cuts really poorly and it leaves an uneven bottom. In this video, I'm going to help you solve both those problems quickly and easily. I'm going to start with the no dado set problem, then I'll move on to the bad dado set problem, and finally I'll show you how these same lessons can be applied to a few other clever ideas that you're not going to want to miss. Now, if you don't have a dado set for a table saw, your best bet is to just use a router. Unfortunately, that often means an edge guide and maybe even a guide plate to connect to it. Then there are the offsets to calculate to account for the space between the edge of the router bit and the edge of the actual guide. But you don't need to do any of that. Let me show you a simpler way. I'm just going to take a scrap of wood and put it right along the line I need to cut. No offset, no math, it just goes right on the line. I don't even need a big fancy router. I'm just going to use a trim router. What you will need though is a router bit. But this is way cheaper and safer to use than a dado set, and you can do a lot more with this, as I'm going to show you here shortly. The bearing rides against my scrap wood, and I get a perfect flat bottom dado in a single pass. It is that easy. Let me tell you, when I was a kid making bookshelves from scrap boards in my grandpa's garage, I would have loved to have had something like this because I wasn't allowed to use the table saw at all. Now, what if your grandpa lets you use the table saw? Or you do have a dado set, but it's one of those crappy ones that leave the messy bottom like this. Well, check this out. I don't even need a straight edge because the dado itself becomes the straight edge as the bit cleans up the bottom. It really doesn't get any easier than that. In fact, these are sometimes called dado cleanout bits for that reason. Now, the cutting width of this bit is 1/2 inch, but what if my dado has to be wider than that? No problem. I simply use the workpiece that I'm going to fit into the dado to set the spacing between two straight edges, and I cut it in 2 passes. This works with pretty much any material thickness as long as it's more than the 1/2 inch diameter of the bit. Now let me show you a couple of other cool things you can do with the same bit. I'm cutting out a notch in this scrap of wood. Then I'll attach a couple more scraps to create a fence. And just like that, I have a hinge mortising jig. The bearing runs along the cutout, and there's no need for an offset like the old days when we used bushings to do this. It also sure beats the idea of using a Forstner bit and chisel. Speaking of Forstner bits, that little point in the center is called the spur, and it's great for guiding the bit, but sometimes you don't want the little dimple it leaves in the bottom of the hole. No problem. I'll just use the edge of the hole itself as a guide, and the bearing rides along it, cleaning up the bottom. Or I can skip the Forstner bit altogether and use a template to create a hole or shape of any size. Here I'm creating a shallow mortise to make a small bowl or tray. There are many different uses for these bits with templates and guides and straight edges, but there's more to them than meets the eye. Notice how mine has 3 carbide cutters, and they're all angled to create a downward shearing cut. This prevents tear out or fuzzy edges on the surface of the wood you're cutting. This is very important, especially with delicate plywood veneers. Now you can get this type of bit in various lengths. I find that the 1/4 inch length is best for most of the jobs I showed you, especially the dados and grooves, while the longer bits are nice for deeper mortises. But keep in mind that you can still make shallow cuts with longer bits by just making a thicker template or guide. Now these particular bits also have Astra coating, which is why they have that fancy rainbow color. That's a feature of industrial tooling that extends its lifespan. You can get them at bitsbits.com. I'll link to them below this video. Try one. You'll thank me later. I've been a proud Tormek user for years. I've never seen so many clever innovations from just one small company, and the quality is simply uncompromising. Even if you're not in the market for a new sharpening system, you should check them out and see what they have to offer at the link below this video. There's a reason they're regarded as the best of the best.